When I was in school, I learned that there are basically only two types of government in the world. A government like we have here in Canada with a parliament and a prime minister, or a government like they have in America with a Congress and a president. But not all places fit nicely into these two categories. Here are 5 countries that do things their own way. Do you remember how during the whole Occupy Wall Street thing, it was impossible for the protesters to get anything done because they insisted that they were a non-hierarchical collective? Well, believe it or not, that is how the government of Switzerland works, or at least claims to work. In Swiss parliamentary elections, Swiss voters almost always elect these same 4 political parties to roughly the same number of seats, and then those 4 political parties get together and each one gets 2 cabinet ministers each. The Swiss constitution says that this council of 8 people is the country's head of state. They take some fun official portraits. There is a president of Switzerland, but that is a mostly honorary title given to one of the 8 cabinet ministers, and it rotates every January 1st. Any important political decision has to be made by the cabinet as a single hive mind, and its members are not supposed to publicly criticize or question one another. Of course, in practice, the Swiss government is just run by whichever cabinet minister has the most domineering personality or who's been in the job the longest. These are politicians, not gods on Mount Olympus. Japan is the only country in the world that still has an emperor, but unlike the emperors of history, the office of the Japanese emperor is so weak and powerless, you might wonder why they even bother. Under Japan's old constitution, the emperor had a lot of power, and any politician or general who had the emperor's permission could basically do whatever he wanted. This obviously led to a lot of bad stuff, so after World War II, the Americans made the Japanese write a new democratic constitution that gave the emperor a new job description, symbol of the state. Now, it's true that other countries often have kings or queens who are basically figureheads and don't really do much except for visit sick children or knight Patrick Stewart. But even in those countries, the so-called constitutional monarchies, the king or queen usually has some discretionary powers that can be used in times of crisis. In Japan, however, the emperor is not allowed to do anything on his own, like literally nothing. The constitution explicitly says that he shall have no powers related to government, and he can only even do the ceremonial stuff with the permission of cabinet. So this raises an interesting question as to whether or not the Japanese emperor is even part of the Japanese government, or is just some sort of official prop like the national flag or the national animal. And speaking of backwards anachronisms, the Principality of Andorra is a tiny country located on the border between France and Spain. Aside from being really, really small, it is famous for being the last feudal state in Europe. See, during the Middle Ages, this patch of land was co-owned by a French count and a Spanish bishop, and it still is today. Yes, if you live in Andorra in the 21st century, you are living in a country that is still controlled by a single Frenchman and a single Spanish bishop who are given the title of co-princes. Only since there aren't any French noblemen anymore, the role of the French count is now played by the French president. But of course, this is all just weird tradition. Andorra stopped being a feudal society a long time ago, and they now have a democratic government that no longer requires its citizens to spend long hours toiling in the field in order to pay tenancy fees to their foreign absentee landowners. That system was abolished in 1993. And speaking of microstates, Italy, we may remember, is a relatively new country that was formed in 1861 by an amalgamation of a bunch of tiny little Italian city-states. Well, one city-state didn't want to go in for the deal, and today it is an independent country of 30,000 people known as the Most Serene Republic of San Marino. And with a name like that, you just know they're going to have a wonderfully pretentious political system. So the San Marinians elect a parliament, and from that parliament they elect not 1 but 2 people to serve as their joint heads of state, known as the regent captains. They get to wear special robes and sashes and meet with the Pope and all the rest of it. The captain's terms last for 6 months, after which, and I swear I'm not making this up, there is an official 3-day period for the citizens to complain about everything they did wrong, followed by a national holiday. Because why not? Of course, 6 months is not really enough time to get anything of substance done, so in practice, the San Marinian government is actually run by the Secretary of State, and Italy. Fun fact, for most of the 20th century, the San Marinian government was also run by communists. And finally, talking of communists, North Korea's government is very weird, but you probably already knew that. But did you know that our old pal Kim Jong-un is not technically president of North Korea? No, his title is First Secretary of the Workers' Party, First Chairman of the National Defense Commission, and Supreme Commander of the Korean People's Army. The president of North Korea is Kim Jong-un's grandfather, Kim Il-sung, who the North Korean Constitution declares to be the country's eternal president, despite the fact that he's been dead for 20 years. The next highest ranking politician in the North Korean government is the Eternal General Secretary of the Workers' Party, who is Kim Jong-un's father, Kim Jong-il, who's only been dead for a sprightly 4 years. This means that North Korea's political system, properly understood, is a mortocracy, or rule by the dead. This is also the system of government used in places such as Raccoon City and Halloween Town. So anyway, the point is, no matter how bad your country's government might be, at least you can take comfort in the fact that you're not being ruled by 2 generations of corpses. How's that for damning with faint praise?